Welcome to the History Unplugged podcast, the unscripted show that celebrates unsung heroes, myth-busts historical lies, and rediscovers the forgotten stories that changed our world. I'm your host, Scott Rank. Hi everyone, welcome to an in-between episode where I answer any question that you have about history. Today's question comes from Josh Kitta. He says, could you talk about the Easter Uprising? I would be glad to. The Easter Uprising is one of those events that the event itself is small, but the event is the culmination of hundreds of years of history, and the after effects are so important that the event itself takes on enormous symbolic importance. Okay, what is the Easter Uprising? First, the facts. The Easter Uprising happened on April 24th, 1916, on Easter Monday. A group of Irish nationalists proclaimed the establishment of the Irish Republic, a declaration of independence from the United Kingdom. Along with 1,600 followers, they staged a rebellion against the British government in Ireland. As part of this, they seized prominent buildings in Dublin and clashed with British troops. The insurrection had been suppressed after about a week. More than 2,000 people were dead or injured. The leaders of the rebellion were soon executed. The event itself happened with little fanfare, and there was little support initially from the Irish people for the Easter Rising. But public opinion later shifted, and the executed leaders became martyrs. What it led to was in 1921, a treaty was signed that in 1922 established the Irish Free State, which became the modern-day Republic of Ireland. Okay, so that's the context. Now consider when this is happening. This is happening during World War I, and that's no coincidence because if you're a group within Great Britain, it makes sense to do something like this when many of the troops of the homeland are occupied elsewhere on the continental mainland. Okay, so let's talk about the background context of the Easter Uprising. And Rosina Sabur in The Telegraph gives good context to this whole issue. So the Easter Uprising was predicated on growing tensions between Irish nationalists and the British government. This goes back to the 1800 Act of Union, which merged Ireland with the UK, and for several decades, nationalists had been pushing for home rule. Something that triggered this goes all the way back to the potato famine of 1845-1847, where much of the Irish population felt that the UK hadn't given them proper provisioning and help, leading to many of them going to the United States and many others dying from malnutrition. The Act of Union meant Ireland lost its parliament in Dublin and was governed from Westminster. Irish nationalists, since its inception, have been staging their opposition to this shift of power. They lobbied for an arrangement where the country remained part of the UK, but had some form of self-government. It wasn't until 1914 that a bill to this effect was passed through Westminster, and it was in motion, but its implementation was suspended at the outbreak of the First World War. Nationalists thought that the First World War was being used as a pretense to stall its passage. The Irish Republican Brotherhood began planning the Easter Uprising with military support from Germany with the outbreak of the First World War. They were an underground group of revolutionaries, and they believed that home rule did not yield enough and sought complete independence from Great Britain. Why was the Easter Uprising so significant? Well, at first the rebels' actions were not met with much support from the Irish, but the executed leaders were later heralded as martyrs as public opinion shifted. This was due to the harsh mass arrests and martial law in Ireland, which stayed in place through the autumn, fueling the public's resentment of the British and leading to growing support for the rebels and Irish independence. Here are some of the key figures of the Easter Uprising. Eamon de Valera, he evaded a death sentence and dominated Ireland's political landscape, later as president. Another, Roger Casement, had planned a shipment of German arms and ammunition for the rebels, but it was detected by the British shortly before the Rising. Casement was charged with treason and executed in the summer of 1916. Patrick Pearse was part of the Irish volunteer force and played an active role in preparing for the Rising, though it's unlikely he fired any shots. Before his execution, he was proclaimed president of the provisional government the rebels attempted to establish. Another key figure was James Connolly. He was a trade union leader. The image of a wounded Connolly facing a firing squad changed public opinion and was a key contribution to the bitterness against the British in Ireland. And a few other figures. One was Thomas Clark. He'd been in favor of armed revolution for most of his life. He spent 15 years in English prisons before his role in the Easter Rising and was executed after it was thwarted. Sean McDiarmida was another signatory of the proclamation. He was a member of the military committee of the Irish Republican Brotherhood. And Thomas MacDonagh, a political activist poet, also signed the proclamation. He was a member of the Gaelic League and a founding member of the Irish Volunteers with Pearse and Owen MacNeill. So the UK's 1918 general election saw the Republican political party Sinn Féin win the majority of Irish seats. They refused to sit in Westminster and in January 1919 met in Dublin to convene an Irish parliament and declare Ireland's independence. The Easter Rising was also a factor in the establishment of the Irish Free State, now the Republic of Ireland, in 1922, following a treaty agreement in 1921. Part of this was a result of the Irish Republican Army launching an attack against the British government and its troops based in Ireland. The 1921 ceasefire resulted in the two sides signing a treaty establishing the self-governing Irish Free State. 6 northern counties in the province of Ulster opted out of the Free State and remained with the UK. So this is Northern Ireland, a mostly Protestant state, whereas the Republic of Ireland is mostly Catholic. Obviously, these tensions didn't die down due to many bombings in the 1970s with the Irish Republican Army. And a fully independent Republic of Ireland was formally proclaimed on Easter Monday, 1949. So the centenary of Easter Uprising occurred in 1916. On International Women's Day, March 8th of last year, the role of women involved in the events of 1916 was marked in a ceremony at the Royal Hospital in Dublin. On Easter Sunday, March 26th, there was a remembrance ceremony in the Garden of Remembrance in Parnell Square, Dublin. A parade went through Dublin, stopping at the city's General Post Office to mark the day. Okay, so why did they stop at a post office? That's because when the Easter Uprising occurred, rebels seized strategic buildings within the city, and one of the seized buildings was the city's General Post Office. And it was from here that the independent Ireland was proclaimed and the announcement of a provisional government. Now, a post office is a modest building, and it shows that the event itself, again, was quite a modest affair. Yes, there were thousands of people involved, but the events leading up to it and the events that sprung from it are far more monumental in importance. Well, Josh, thank you so much for the question. If any of you would like to submit one to me, you can do so by going to historyunpluggedpodcast.com. You can submit a question to me in the form of voicemail, and there are instructions all over the website on how to do that, or in email. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Thanks for listening to the History Unplugged podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get your daily dose of all things history related, from ancient Greece to the Cold War. You can do that by going to historyonthenet.com/subscribe. Speaking of history on the net, if you want to dive deeper, go to our site historyonthenet.com, and there you'll find blog posts, book reviews, and all of our other podcast episodes. Plus, don't forget to rate and review this podcast so we can bring you the best daily history content possible. We'll see you next time at the History Unplugged podcast.